As mentioned in a prior video, many Neo Geo games were ported to many consoles across several generations. Unfortunately, numerous other quality titles for the Neo Geo never made their way to home systems during the era in which such games were originally released. In this video, I will talk about 5 Neo Geo titles that should have been ported to other home systems during the period in which they came out. Some of these unported titles found their way to compilation packs or digital distribution long after their original arcade release dates, but for this video we will ignore that. To spread the wealth, I will pair the 5 games across 5 consoles. For the sake of authenticity, these games were selected on the basis that A, they would have been able to run on the hardware of the consoles I paired them with to a reasonable degree, and B, fit within the scope of each system's library. Some of these picks were recommendations from fellow YouTubers based on a community post I did several months ago. I will mention their channels for those selections. Without further ado, let's begin. The first console I will start with is a Super NES, and the featured game will be Blues Journey, which was mentioned by Kinda Cool. Blues Journey is an environmentally themed adventure title where Blue must stop the Daruma Emperor from polluting the world of Raggi. There are 6 rounds with a total of 22 levels. You will play through 4 of these rounds as there are split paths you take for the second and third rounds. The lands of Raggi are diverse and colorful, featuring multiple layers of background scrolling which add depth to the environments. Like many games of its kind, you will jump across platforms while avoiding obstacles and hazards and battle enemies that move and attack in numerous ways. There are several weapons to use, along with power-ups which are found throughout each level or purchased in shops. Blue can shrink in size to access narrow paths. Exploration of each level reveals hidden surprises. Finally, there is co-op play, which is useful in accessing hard-to-reach platforms. Blues Journey shares similar traits to games like Wonder Boy and Monsterland, and of course the Super Mario Bros. Series. Blues Journey's colorful cartoon-like graphics fit the mold of Nintendo's family-friendly image, alongside contemporary Super NES titles like Super Adventure Island and Super Mario World. How would a Super Nintendo port fare? The colored background details and the multi-layered scrolling would hold up well. There will be graphic compression due to the Super NES's lower resolution width. Super Nintendo ports of arcade games often had reduced sprite sizes, but since Blues Journey's sprite characters are small to begin with, this should not have been a hindrance, though slowdown is inevitable. The soundtrack on the Neo Geo version had a cheerful vibe, which didn't show the system's capability on full display. Keep in mind that this is amongst the earliest titles, thus the Super Nintendo could produce an accurate rendition. The co-op feature must be retained, as that made it stand out against the Super Mario Bros. Series. Blues Journey takes around 35 minutes to complete, but that varies depending on how much exploration you put in and credits you use. For a console game, they could alter the map to include another round in a setting such as a desert to get more bang for your buck. To avoid making a potential home port a walk in the park as you continue from where you left off, there could be a limited number of credits required to complete the game, or allow infinite credits but have the player continue from the start of the round. On to the next game. Our next console will be the Sega Genesis, and the game of choice will be Magician Lord, courtesy of SNK Fight Fan. In Magician Lord, Elta must save his homeland by finding the 8 volumes of Sorcerer's Books to seal Galagis and prevent Azatorse from destroying the land. Some stages in Magician Lord require navigation through a series of corridors and doors, giving them a maze-like structure. You must avoid hazards like pits, spikes, spears, and fire. Thorough exploration leads to treasure chests, which contain trinkets which boost your score, weapon power-ups, and orbs that transform Elta into different warriors, each with their own method of attack. The transformation depends on the color combination of orbs collected. Magician Lord is known for being one of the most difficult platform adventure titles. The unpredictability of the appearances of flying enemies shooting projectiles makes it tough to jump from one platform to the next, or to deal with them along with the fixed place enemies. The spawning frogmen in stage 5 are pure hell. You take a few hits before losing a life. When hit, you're knocked back and briefly invulnerable, but if you're surrounded by enemies, you can end up taking multiple hits in succession, quickly losing a life. Depending on which version you play, when you lose a life or use a credit, you continue right from where you left off or from the last door you entered, with the latter making it tough to get to the boss. Magician Lord would be a great fit for the Genesis alongside contemporary side-scrolling platformers like Strider, Revenge of Shinobi, Toki, and Ghouls and Ghosts. A Genesis port of Magician Lord would include options such as difficulty selection, hit points per life, and maximum number of credits. Magician Lord featured detailed backgrounds and structures with multiple layers of scrolling. A Genesis version should handle this well, with the chance that a background scrolling layer might be omitted in some spots. There would be a reduction in color palette and structural details. The CPU of the Genesis should handle the on-screen action like a champ. Sprite scaling effects would be removed or altered, and the voices could remain, though they would be scratchy. The 320 pixel resolution width of the Genesis would allow the same reaction time to incoming enemies as the Neo Geo version. It's possible that the HUD data would be placed in bars at the top and or bottom of the screen. Finally, there would need to be a level select code for those that may struggle to reach the end. Now on to game number 3. Batting third is a PC Engine, and my selection for this console is Androdunos. In this side-scrolling shooter, you must save mankind from an unknown alien source. You and a friend can team up to take on this force. Stages are a mix of lunar, biological, mechanical, and cavernous locations. Your ship's arsenal consists of a main weapon, missiles, bombs, and a support unit, though you start with just your main weapon. Each of these components are upgradable by picking up different lettered icons. Your main weapon can be swapped at any time from a choice of 4, each providing firepower in different directions. This also applies to your support weapons and shields as well, making it a convenience to adjust your weaponry based on how the enemies approach you in the environment you're in. You can release a charged shot just like an R-Type, but at the expense of 1 power level of your main weapon. Your weapons are downgraded when you lose a life. B bonus icons appear after defeating certain enemies. Collecting all of them in a stage awards power-ups to your full arsenal. As any PC Engine fan knows, the system was home to lots of great shooters, so Androdunos would fit right in. The format for Androdunos would be the arcade CD-ROM, as was the case for the other Neo Geo games ported to the PC Engine. The colorful yet not overly complex look of Androdunos should allow the PC Engine to do a fine job handling the details, colors, and scrolling, considering the visual quality of side-scrolling shooters like Gate of Thunder, Lords of Thunder, Dead Moon, Air Zonk, and Super Darius, the last of which have levels that may have served as an inspiration for Androdunos. There would be a minor loss in color and some details. The score and weapon info might be in black bars. There would be a reduction in the resolution width. One concern I do have is that co-op play could be omitted in order to keep the action running smoothly. Cinematic cutscenes and an arranged soundtrack would complement the port. Now on to game number 4. Next on the list is the Sega Saturn, with my game of choice being Kizuna Encounter Super Tag Battle. This weapons-based tag team fighter was a sequel to Savage Reign. A second Battle of the Beast Gods tournament was set up by King Leo. Like many of its Neo Geo fighting brethren, Kizuna Encounter stages scaled out. Attacks consist of punches, kicks, and weapons, which can be combined to make nifty combos. There are a couple of interesting aspects of this game. One is that you cannot freely tag your partner in. You must stand in your designated tag zone as indicated on the ground, which is red on the player 1 side and blue on the player 2 side. The other is that you must deplete the health bar of only one of your opponents to win a match. Because of how tagging works, you want to try to corner your opponent on the side of the screen opposite from his or her partner. As a countermeasure, the cornered player can use a technique to move around his opponent. When your health is low, you can perform desperation attacks, and if you are standing in your tag zone in this state, you can execute a tag team attack. While the Saturn has plenty of quality fighters, including tag team variants like X-Men and Marvel vs. Street Fighter and Power Instinct Groove On Fight, adding Kizuna Encounter to the mix would have brought awareness of this fast-paced, combo-friendly, yet obscure fighter to people who did not know about its existence back then, myself included. A Saturn port would have mostly been spot on. Expect the game to have utilized the 1 MB RAM card. Early test versions of Kizuna Encounter featured 4-player action, with each person controlling a different fighter. Adding this feature to a Saturn port would have made it stood out amongst fighters for that system. Nearly every frame of animation would have been accounted for. There would be a slight loss of clarity in the voices, as was the case for many home ports of fighters back then. An arranged soundtrack would have been composed. The options menu would have included a practice mode, which was not in the Neo Geo AES version, an art gallery, and adjustable game speed, the last of which was in the Neo Geo AES version but not the MVS. We move on to our final game. The last console in this video will be the Sega Dreamcast, and my potential port of choice is Shock Troopers Second Squad. To avoid comparisons to its predecessor, I will cover the basics of Second Squad as its own entity. In this overhead run-and-gun game, a terrorist organization, Dio, has established the regime over the nation of Bilberg. The world has 72 hours to accept Dio's authority, or else they will set off the ultimate weapon. You choose from 4 commandos, each with distinct primary, secondary, and melee weapons, along with varying attributes such as attack power, defense, and movement speed. There are 5 stages to complete, with a choice of a split path to take after the first level. Like many games of its kind, you pick up various weapon icons providing alternate firepower with limited use. Other items include gold medals, bars, and coins which boost your score, restoration of your health and secondary weapons, and power-ups for your main weapon. You can board armored trucks, tanks, and robots for extra firepower and protection. Dio troops attack in various formations with a wide assortment of weapons, whether it be on foot or in vehicles. Boss fights consist of complex vehicles, aircraft, and structures with many target points. Enemies produce massive amounts of bullets, lasers, and other projectiles, causing constant slowdown, which was the main criticism of this game. The Dreamcast was home to shooters of all kinds, to include run-and guns such as Expendables and Cannon Spike, which is why I included Shock Troopers Second Squad in this mix. By the 6th console generation, you would expect home ports of Neo Geo games to be perfect, but imperfections reared its head, such as the lack of haze effects in the Burning House stage of The Last Blade 2 for the Dreamcast and PlayStation 2. Let's give the benefit of the doubt here and assume that a Dreamcast port of Shock Troopers Second Squad carries over perfectly. This potential port could have 2 gameplay options, one for the original game, and the second could be an enhanced version using updated graphics like the King of Fighters 98 and 99 ports, with the slowdown removed, making the game even more difficult. The enhanced mode could be unlocked after completing the original game. An arranged soundtrack with the choice to use the original tunes, and an art gallery would be included. Like the Neo Geo AES version, there must be a limited number of credits with no option to save the game, as it was one of the few titles that did not make use of the memory card. This concludes the video on 5 picks for Neo Geo games that should have been ported to other consoles during their heyday. There are other titles that I could have featured in this video, but I will leave that up to my fellow viewers to chime in. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next time.